Wants to be having to do this again.
And it's probably about 5 times, actually.
This comes after his
New York skyline, and greater than any FIFA ever held. Very, very badly damaged. They've lost everything almost militarily. They've got very little left. They've got some missiles.
The President of the United States turned from that celebration to address some of the heaviest matters on his desk. Spain had just defeated Argentina by a single goal in the 2026 final, played at the stadium complex in the New York and New Jersey area, and Trump, who attended the match, then spoke briefly with reporters as he made his way to Marine One. In those few minutes, he touched on the conflict with Iran, on Canadian wildfire smoke crossing into American skies, and on his own claims of election interference. That contrast is where this report begins. What I want to examine first is the setting itself, because it shaped everything that followed. Trump had traveled to the tournament final, and by his own description, took part in delivering the gold trophy to the winning Spanish side.
Not the same thing. What we're doing now is we're ending any chance where they could have a nuclear missile. If you look at it, after a week and a half, not 4 weeks, a week and a half.
He praised the event in expansive terms, telling reporters that it was one of the greatest events of any kind ever held, and describing it as several times larger than previous editions of the competition. He congratulated the FIFA president, Gianni Infantino, and the staff who organized it, and he framed the tournament as a showcase for the United States. Those are his characterizations, offered in the glow of a high-profile night.
I spoke to him about it. I said, you gotta get it stopped. It's really forest management, and they should know how to do that. If you go back 4 or 5 years.
On the match itself, Trump offered a light assessment. Asked whether he had supported Argentina, he said he had not been in a particular section of the crowd and that both teams had performed well, adding that in his view, Spain had played better across the contest. He described the final as close and exciting despite the single-goal margin. None of that is controversial, and I mention it only because it sets up the sharp turn that came next. Within the same short exchange, the tone shifted from a sporting celebration to national security, and that shift is the real substance of the story.
This comes after his trip to the New York, New Jersey Stadium for the 2026 FIFA World Cup, where he was the deliverer.
That brings us to Iran. Trump used the conversation to restate a firm position that Iran must not be allowed to obtain a nuclear weapon. He went further, telling reporters that the United States had struck Iran again, describing the action as recent and forceful. He claimed that Iran had been very badly damaged militarily and that little remained of its capabilities, while acknowledging that it still possessed some missiles, some drones, and some manufacturing ability. He also asserted that the United States controls the strategic waterway in the region, a reference widely understood to mean the Strait of Hormuz, through which a significant share of the world's oil trade passes. Here, I want to be careful and precise, because this is exactly the kind of claim that requires clear attribution. These are statements from the President of the United States, delivered informally to reporters, and they describe military operations and their results. The available material does not include independent confirmation of the strikes he referenced, an official damage assessment, or corroboration from Iranian authorities. When a leader describes an adversary as having lost nearly everything, that is a political and strategic characterization, not a verified battlefield report. The responsible way to present it is to say plainly what Trump asserted, while noting that the fuller picture, including any response from Tehran, was not laid out in the remarks themselves. There is also a somber element within his comments that deserves restrained handling. Trump indicated that recent action had been taken in honor of what he described as 3 individuals he called patriots, suggesting a loss of American lives connected to the broader confrontation, though he was not definitive about the number and said the matter would be addressed more precisely at a later point. He did not provide names, circumstances, or an official accounting. I will not speculate beyond what he said. What matters for our understanding is that the president tied the military posture toward Iran to a human cost, while leaving the specifics for a future statement. To understand why this matters, we need to look at the larger arc of the Iran issue. The central question for years has been whether Iran is moving toward a nuclear weapons capability, and successive American administrations have treated that possibility as a red line. In his remarks, Trump drew a distinction that is worth unpacking. He described an earlier phase as an effort to stop Iran from reaching a certain capability, and he described the current phase as an effort to end any chance of Iran acquiring a nuclear missile. That is a meaningful difference in framing. Preventing a capability and eliminating the possibility of one are not identical goals, and the shift in language points to a hardening of the stated objective. The timing is especially important. Trump was asked, in effect, about a promise to bring a conflict to a close within a matter of weeks, and he pushed back on the premise. He argued that the task had grown larger than initially described, and he suggested that the effort was now closer to a conclusion than his questioner implied, referencing a span of a week and a half to 2 weeks rather than a longer timeline. He stopped short of using the word probably when describing outcomes, appearing to want a firmer tone. What the audience should take from this is that the president is signaling confidence and momentum, but the precise status of the operation and any independent verification of it was not spelled out in these brief comments. I now want to move to the second major threat of the evening, which is Canada, and specifically the wildfire smoke that has been drifting south across the border. Trump confirmed that he had spoken with Canada's Prime Minister, Mark Carney, during the World Cup final, and he characterized their relationship in positive terms. But he made clear that the conversation was not only social. According to Trump, he raised the wildfires directly, telling the Prime Minister that the smoke needed to be stopped because it was affecting air quality in the United States. He described the air as having been poisoned by the smoke, and he pointed to the northeastern part of the country, as well as portions of the mid-Atlantic and the Midwest, as areas that had been affected. The economic dimension is where his comments became more pointed. Trump singled out Michigan, and the Detroit area in particular, saying that businesses had been forced to close, and that automotive plants and other operations had been shut down as conditions worsened. He then floated the idea that Canada might be asked to pay damages, or that tariffs of some kind could be considered, framing the smoke as a cross-border harm with a price attached. He also described the situation as unusual by historical standards, saying he did not recall a comparable problem several years earlier, and he characterized the underlying issue as a matter of forest management that, in his view, should be handled more effectively. I want to add necessary context here, because the framing carries weight. Wildfire smoke moving from Canada into the United States is not a new phenomenon, and it has become a recurring seasonal concern in recent years as large fires generate plumes that travel long distances. Trump's suggestion that this rarely happened in the past is his own recollection rather than an established finding. And the causes of large wildfires are complex, involving factors such as weather patterns, drought conditions, and land management practices. The proposal that Canada should pay damages or face tariffs over the smoke is exactly that. A proposal raised in informal remarks, not an announced policy, a completed decision, or a negotiated agreement between the two governments. The diplomatic layer adds another dimension to the story. The relationship between the United States and Canada under Trump and Prime Minister Carney has been closely watched, and trade tensions, including tariff disputes, have been a recurring feature of that relationship. When a sitting American president publicly links an environmental and public health issue to the possibility of financial penalties or trade measures against a close neighbor and ally, that connection can carry political consequences on both sides of the border. It is worth emphasizing that Trump described his relationship with Carney as good, even while raising the prospect of damages, which suggests he is separating the personal rapport from the policy pressure he is applying. For Canadians and Americans alike, the practical consequences may be more immediate than the diplomatic ones. On the American side, communities dealing with degraded air quality face real disruptions, from health advisories to interruptions in outdoor activity and, as Trump described in Michigan, potential effects on industrial operations. On the Canadian side, any suggestion that the country could be held financially responsible for wildfire smoke or subjected to new tariffs would land as a significant development for a government already managing a complicated trade relationship with Washington. At this stage, though, what has been confirmed is a conversation and a set of remarks, not a formal claim, a bill, or a trade action. There is also a broader question about how two governments would even approach responsibility for something like drifting smoke.
Posting from the air en route to New York, President Trump said the United States is being unnecessarily invaded by filthy, polluted and unhealthy.
Assigning liability across a border for the movement of air, weather, and the consequences of natural events is legally and diplomatically complicated, and nothing in the available material indicates that a formal mechanism for such a claim exists or has been agreed upon. That is why I am treating Trump's comments as an expression of frustration and a policy signal rather than a concrete step. Officials have not outlined any process by which damages would be calculated, requested, or paid, and the tariff idea was raised as one possibility among others. The political response and the domestic angle bring us to the third thread of the evening, which involves Trump's allegations of election interference. During the same exchange, a reporter asked about consequences for what was described as China's alleged election meddling, and Trump gave only a brief answer. This connects to a more prominent moment earlier in the week, a primetime address the president delivered on Thursday evening at roughly 9 o'clock in the evening in the Eastern Time Zone, during which he raised claims of election interference. Members of his administration subsequently addressed the subject with the press, with the Department of Homeland Security speaking about election security and election integrity the following morning. I want to be very clear about how to handle this, because election-related allegations demand careful language. What is confirmed by the material is that Trump made claims of election interference in a primetime speech, that he referenced alleged meddling connected to China, and that administration officials followed up by discussing election security. What is not established within these remarks is the evidence behind the allegations, the specific nature of the interference described, or any formal findings. An allegation, even one delivered by a president in a national address, is not the same as a proven fact. The available information indicates that this is a developing claim being advanced by the administration, and it should be understood in those terms until more detail is provided. The fact that the president touched on election interference in the middle of a casual exchange about a soccer final tells us something about how prominent the issue has become for his administration. He kept his answer short, which limits what can be responsibly reported, but the combination of a primetime address, follow-up comments from cabinet-level officials, and public references to a foreign government points to a coordinated emphasis. What remains unresolved is whether specific actions, investigations, or policy responses will follow, and what evidence the administration will present publicly to support the claims it has made. Let me now step back and connect these threads, because what stands out to me is not any single topic, but the range of them compressed into a few minutes. In one short conversation, the president moved from praising a global sporting event to describing military action against Iran, to raising the possibility of penalties against Canada over wildfire smoke, to touching on allegations of election interference. Each of these is a substantial story on its own, and each carries its own uncertainties. The setting, a celebratory night at a World Cup final, is a reminder that major policy signals often emerge in unscripted moments rather than formal briefings. On Iran, the essential unanswered questions are these. What exactly was the nature and result of the military action the president referenced? How has Iran responded? And what does ending any chance of a nuclear capability actually require in practical terms? Trump projected confidence and suggested the effort was nearing a conclusion, but he did not provide an independent accounting, and the human cost he alluded to was left for a future statement. Those are the details worth watching for, because they will determine whether this is a contained operation or the opening of a longer confrontation. On Canada, the open questions center on whether the president's remarks translate into any formal action. Will the administration actually pursue the idea of damages? Will tariffs be raised in connection with the wildfire smoke? And how will Prime Minister Carney's government respond to being publicly linked to a cross-border harm? It is entirely possible that these comments remain rhetorical, an expression of pressure rather than a prelude to policy. It is also possible that they become part of the broader trade conversation between the two countries. That outcome remains possible, but it has not been confirmed, and no formal step has been announced. On the election interference claims, the key question is evidence. The administration has made allegations at the highest level and has signaled a focus on election security, but the substance behind the claims, and any consequences that might follow, have not been laid out in the material available. This is the kind of story where the responsible approach is to report the claims accurately, attribute them clearly, and wait for supporting detail before drawing conclusions. Voters, in particular, deserve clarity, and clarity depends on specifics that have not yet been provided. There is a common thread running through all three subjects, and it is the gap between assertion and confirmation. In each case, the president made strong statements that Iran has been largely disarmed of its capabilities, that Canada might owe damages, that foreign interference affected the election. In each case, the statements came without the accompanying documentation that would allow independent verification. This is not unusual for informal remarks delivered while walking to a helicopter, but it is precisely why careful reporting matters. The job here is to convey what was said, to place it in context, and to distinguish clearly between what a leader claims and what has been established. Who could be affected by all of this is a wide circle. In the Iran situation, the potential effects extend to regional stability, to global energy markets, given the reference to a critical shipping route, and to American service members and personnel connected to the operations described. In the Canada situation, the people most directly touched are residents breathing degraded air across several American regions, workers and businesses in affected industrial areas, and the broader trade relationship that supports jobs on both sides of the border.
They'll have it be maxed out. It'll take about a month.
Mr. President, Canadian wildfires. Did you speak to the Canadian Prime Minister?
I did. Well, I was just saying I gave an answer here.
In the election matter, the stakes involve public confidence in the electoral process itself, which is why the demand for evidence is so central. What happens next will depend on several factors. On Iran, the next official statements, including any precise accounting of casualties and any formal assessment of the strikes, could sharpen or soften the picture the president painted. On Canada, the response from Prime Minister Carney's government and any indication from Washington about whether damages or tariffs will actually be pursued will show whether the president's comments were a passing remark or a genuine policy direction. On the election claims, the release of any supporting evidence or additional statements from Homeland Security officials will determine how seriously the allegations can be evaluated. Until then, much of this remains in the category of claims and proposals rather than settled outcomes. I also want to underline the significance of the moment for how leaders communicate. A World Cup final is a stage designed for celebration, and yet it became the backdrop for statements about war, cross-border tensions, and the integrity of an election. That layering of the ceremonial and the consequential is itself part of the story. It shows how modern political communication can blend a globally watched cultural event with the most serious questions a government faces, and it means that audiences increasingly have to sort signal from spectacle in real time. My role in walking you through this is to separate the verified from the asserted, so that the picture you are left with is accurate rather than merely dramatic. To bring us back to the center of this report, the confirmed development is straightforward. Donald Trump attended the 2026 FIFA World Cup final, where Spain defeated Argentina by 1 goal, and afterward, he spoke briefly with reporters about Iran, Canadian wildfire smoke, and election interference. Beyond that, much of what he said falls into the category of claims and proposals. He described military action against Iran and asserted heavy damage to its capabilities. He raised the possibility of damages or tariffs against Canada over the smoke drifting into American skies. He restated allegations of election interference connected to a primetime address earlier in the week. What ties these together is that they are consequential, they are contested or unverified in important respects, and they are still unfolding. What remains unresolved is nearly everything that matters most: the true status and outcome of the Iran operation, whether any formal action toward Canada will materialize, and what evidence supports the election interference claim.
What are the consequences for China for meddling in U.S. elections after your...
Well, we're going to see. We'll be speaking to them. We'll be seeing.
And sir, could I ask you,
These are the threads to follow in the days ahead, because the next official statements are likely to clarify what these informal remarks only outlined. For now, the most honest summary is that a celebratory evening surfaced a cluster of serious and developing stories, each of which deserves continued and careful attention as more verified information becomes available. Thank you for watching my report on President Trump's remarks after the 2026 FIFA World Cup final, and on what he said about Iran, the Canadian wildfire smoke, and his election interference claims. Every one of these threads is still developing, and the next official statements could change the picture significantly. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you can follow the verified updates as these stories move forward, and so you never miss the moment when the confirmed details finally catch up with the claims.